In 1278, after a hard-earned and prosperous decade of peace for Vannonia, Emperor Agatha Alarie of France declared war with a sweeping ambition to reclaim all that Emperor Allister V had taken from France in the Normandy and Dover Wars. Her army flooded into the coast and swiftly conquered several counties, showing little mercy to those interlopers which now lived in the towns there. Allister V then gave his men a strange order to allow them to gather their forces, and when the Vannin ships arrived at the beach, they were to remain in them, so as to conceal their numbers. This army numbered 99,000 in their boats. When the French began to march towards the shore, setting up defenses and even managing to burn some of the boats, the army all sailed to shore and disembarked at once, shouting as one as they scrambled onto the beach to meet the unprepared defenders. The French force of 78,000 men, terrified for their lives and doubtful of their chances, turned heel and ran. The invasion force then reclaimed the coast and laid waste to the French countryside beyond it. Upon seeing this spectacle of gore, Empress Agatha the Just surrendered her war of vengeance. In 1279, Allister's wife died, childless too, as she was always much too old to give him children. So, taking this in stride, Allister V married his former mistress. He also decreed that the legal codes of Vannin be revisited and the succession laws be made explicit in their language, in order to ensure women could not inherit, as he did not believe his new wife capable and wanted to close any openings for her in the event of his death. In 1280, the Krakow Federation collapsed into a civil war, two factions in conflict regarding religion, a Catholic and Orthodox side thereof. The Krakowian nobility and people generally chose Catholicism as a natural decision of theirs, but the intervention of the Orthodox Church had seeded a desire for orthodoxy that had only grown in the northern parts of the Federation. That this would come to blows was nobody's intention, but it was in the end inevitable. However, of this fight there would be no winner. As it collapsed into its member states, the young Krakowian crown too weak to hold the country together. The Empire of Magyarország, which sided with the Southern Catholics, inherited the bulk of its territory, and so the Magyars were once again a major player in the Balkans. Yet further to the east, the Mongol Khanate was adapting to its new religion poorly and lost half its land due to lesser Mongol lords leaving it, in favor of other spiritual and temporal paths. In 1281, hoping to unite Christendom and get in the way of Orthodox expansion, Pope Martinus III declared the 10th Crusade, this time for the Shahdam of Kor, a breakaway kingdom from the Orthodox Mongols near the Black Sea, which had chosen Islam for itself. Meanwhile, in 1284, feeling as though he could make his empire more secure and control trade even further in the North Sea, Allister V set his eyes on the Danish lowlands. This would not only further enrich Vannonia, but the trade ports there were Denmark's main source of income. Taking this away from them meant steady decline, if not total collapse. Declaring war that year, he sailed 54,000 men into Zealand. Sensing an opportunity, the new emperor, Géraud Alarie of France, declared war once again for the lands that had been taken from his sister and his people over 20 years ago in the Dover War. This prompted Allister V to raise a second army of 52,000 men and sail them to the Strait of Dover to march into Rouen and repel the French forces that were once again attacking the coast. The next to join this increasingly out-of-hand conflict was Ypres. Shamed, poor, and still proud, they were desperate for access to the sea, and so they declared war for the Duchy of Flanders, the coastal half of their kingdom which they lost to Vannonia long ago. In a matter of weeks, all the gains that Vannonia had made on the continent were threatened, and it was all due to Allister V's hunger for further conquest. Well and truly in a panic, the Emperor responded to this by hiring 70,000 mercenaries and ordering them to meet the force in Rouen to defend against the 81,000-man French army. A host of 40,000 Danes came sweeping unexpectedly from the south and stopped the Vannin siege in Zealand, delivering them a savage defeat. The largest standing army in the history of the Isles, a force of 120,000 men was raised to chase the 80,000-man French army, seeking to undo them before they could launch another attack. The Battle of the Seine was the site of this great butchering. The river Seine ran red with the blood of over 65,000 souls between the two armies, limbs and corpses clogging the river at parts, turning the battlefield into mud, which many of the injured drowned in. This mud was Vannonia's godsend, however. France's knights, which had served them so well, couldn't navigate the mud as their horses got stuck in the mud and in all cases fell over. Vannonia preferred infantry, and so Vannonia had only just snatched victory from the French. And to all observers, it was simply chance that they won. The tide of death would not end here, however. The men wanted revenge for their fallen brothers, and thus, swiftly after the grand battle of the Seine ended, the army marched for the French provinces immediately bordering the Vannonian coast, dashed their fortifications to rubble, and burned all their fields to ash. France lost the war that year in 1285, and it was said that Emperor Géraud slipped into a depression from which he would never recover. This exhausted yet bloodthirsty army then marched north to continue their invasion of the Danish lowlands, leaving the meager Ypres forces of 20,000 men for last. Until this point, the Danes and men of Ypres were only barely held at bay, and if they broke through Vannonian defenses at any point, the war would have been lost. But now the Gold Dragon was on the offensive in the north, and during one of the famous sieges for which Vannonia had become well feared, a horde of 76,000 Danes attacked from the north. From the beginning, it seemed that these wild Northmen had secured victory through numbers, but when Emperor Allister V encountered their emperor, Oscar Laxon, in single combat and slayed him, the tide of battle turned, and after the blood of 54,000 dead men stained the tulips of the lowlands, Vannonia proved victorious. The Danes surrendered in short order as the death of their regent led to yet another civil war between familial claimants to the throne. Finally, the 20,000 knights of Ypres were the last that stood, and so the terrible dragon pursued its quarry. While their bravery was commendable, facing down these insurmountable odds as they were, the battle itself was short, and they were summarily beaten into the dirt. It was clear to all that the time which Ypres was able to stop the advance of Vannonia had passed. Allister moved on to their capital, and after a short siege they surrendered, the terrible conflict ending only a year after it began. Nearly twice the amount of lives that were lost in the Dover War were lost in this short and terrible conflict, which would come to be known as the Tulip War, after the flowers for which the claimed area was famous. After the war, Emperor Allister V would be known as the Just for his fair rule and his even hand, but also mocking the memory and legacy of the deceased Empress of France, Agatha. Meanwhile, in 1290, the Crusade for Cors was a success, establishing them as a Catholic kingdom. On the 14th of February 1299, after reigning over a final 13 years of peace, Emperor Allister V Monad died a natural death at the age of 53. His was a glorious reign, and he commanded the largest army of any before him, at a pledged and potential maximum of 153,000 men. His only son, Emperor Allister VI Monad, ascended to the throne at the age of 15.